This is TWiT.
All right, so there's the real estate market, right, that we all know and we're very familiar with at this point. It's been around for kind of a long time. And then there's the virtual real estate market. And then if you want to go kind of even deeper, there's the virtual real estate market that's based on actual real estate, which, you know, can get a little confusing. But I would guess get used to it, because it really seems to me anyways, this is the kind of the foundation of this burgeoning metaverse that we're all supposedly going to be spending a lot of time with sometime in the future. So joining us to talk about this kind of confusion around what real estate is in the virtual world, and especially when it's tied to your own home, is Janko Ruettgers from Protocol. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to get you back. And I love this story because, A, I didn't know about any of these experiences, these games, whatever you'd like to call them, prior to reading this. But B, it got my mind rolling. Like, it's just not something that I had considered, that our real estate, you know, the homes that we own and live in, might actually have other occupants that we can't see, right? And that's how you start your piece. You talk about a little bit of a discovery that your own home is being owned already and occupied in a virtual world. Set the stage for that. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I was checking out a platform called Upland a couple of weeks ago or a month ago or so. And Upland is basically a Monopoly game that plays out in the real world. So instead of using a traditional game board, they use maps of real cities where you can then buy and trade properties tied to real addresses. And the first thing I did to just get a sense of how this all works was, once I registered for it, I just put in my own address and just tried to check out my own neighborhood, right? And turns out that somebody had bought the address of my property in this game a couple months ago and was now renting it out and making some in-game money with it. And it was a pretty weird feeling that I got from this, because I had never anticipated any of that.
Yeah, it's like it's literally like life that's happening layered on top of where you already are, and understanding that, like you said, this is a game, right? We aren't really talking about the metaverse that I kind of feel like the foundation is being laid for. This isn't a virtual world in the sense that you're in virtual reality or even augmented reality, but it is to a certain degree taking something that exists in the real world and repurposing it in a digital way. Like, what was the feeling that you got from that? Like, what's unsettling about that? Because it's not like these people are actually in your home, but I guess to a certain degree, they kind of are.
I think part of why it felt a little bit weird to discover this is that there was some monetary aspect to it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Once I did the math, I found out that this person was making like the equivalent of 4 cents per month by renting out their place, however you want to call it at this point, right? So It wasn't real money, it wasn't any substantial amount of money, but it still felt kind of weird that they were selling something that I thought belonged to me.
So interesting. Now, like I said, I don't know that Upland in itself qualifies as like a metaverse contender, but, you know, yet, who knows? These kind of experiences and these kind of games could have plans to expand into the virtual world. If that happened, like, any idea what that might look like? Like, you wrote about Upland, but you also wrote about Spotland and GeoWeb. These are 3 different kind of ways to do this whole virtual real estate based on real estate. But, like, do any of them have plans to eventually kind of merge this into a metaverse experience at some point? And what might that look like if they did?
Yeah, I think they all have plans that are much bigger than what they do right now. For example, with Upland, they do want to eventually provide their data to other developers so that they can build their own, maybe games, maybe apps on top of it. And they also want to go in AR. And I think that's the really interesting point, because right now this plays out on a map, on the computer. It doesn't have really any real world implications. But if we consider that maybe in 5 years, maybe in 10 years, maybe sooner, we will all wear these Apple glasses or Google glasses that provide us with information wherever we go and wherever we look. It could be that somebody then looks at my house and sees information that not I put there, but the person who bought that years ago on Upland put there, right? So suddenly you can tie information or AR layers to these real properties, to people's homes, to businesses, and so forth. And then the question is, who has the right to say anything about my house, put a billboard in my backyard, stuff like that, right? And so right now it's a game. Right now it's very, like, few people know about it, but that could actually be an issue too, because if only a couple of people know about this, and it's only enthusiasts and maybe people who are deep into blockchain and these kind of games, what does it mean for the rest of the world, right? We've seen, I live in Oakland, I live in the East Bay, and there's been a lot of talk about gentrification and all these things, displacement and people moving in who have a lot of money. And in a way, you could say the same happens here, where people who have a lot of knowledge and maybe a lot of money can snap up these things early. And then in the future that we don't even know how it looks like yet, they will be the property owners and can then decide whatever information can be on top of these AR layers or whatever else happens with it. And that's sort of concerning.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many comparisons. Then I think the one that kind of comes to mind right now for me is, cryptocurrency, right? Like however many years ago, when Bitcoin was, just this brand new thing that absolutely no one understood except for a very small select few people who had a lot of, saw a lot of potential in it, invested early, and by the way, did not have to invest nearly the same amount of money into it then that you do now if you want to, get into trading cryptocurrencies. But they, over time, because they had the knowledge and the exposure and the interest in this, when no one else was paying attention, now they have they have these large, vast, stores of money that they can literally influence. They're whales at this point. They can influence the entire market based on them being there in the beginning. I think that's one of the really, one of the questions that really stood out for me in reading your piece is just that fact that, like, so many people don't know that this is happening, yet we're also on the cusp of this kind of this transition into what many tech companies feel is like the next wave of technology and the internet and everything, with the metaverse and everything going on there. So how does something like this kind of combine with the momentum to move towards the metaverse? And what does that look like when it all plays out, 10 years down the line, when Facebook, is able to realize like its meta vision long term? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think those are really interesting questions, and it's really hard to find an answer. That was one of the reasons I wrote this story. I really wanted to know, well, first of all, I wanted to know whether I should do anything about that guy who bought, or that person who bought the AR layer or the virtual layer to my house, and whether I could do anything. Like, what's the legal situation? So I talked to a law professor, and he was kind of stumped by all of this and said, there is no analogy to this. There is no case law I can point to. There's no precedent, exactly. And then the question is, then I put that also to the companies in this space, like, what are you going to do when these things come up? And some had no answers at all. Some just said, let the market decide. And others had like really complicated scenarios where they said, well, we built this into the system and we want to make sure that latecomers also have a chance and that people can't just hoard property and so forth. But essentially these rules that are now fleshed out could be really consequential in the future.
Yeah, no question. And especially as we've seen, the desire of anyone who seems to be creating experiences or games or whatever, like, their desire is to grow. And so they're going to grow with systems that, really pull people in. We've also seen, that these experiences can be built with kind of, I don't want to say addictive, but, kind of hooks in them that make them more appealing and harder to put away. And how does that interplay here? And, really on the other side, it feels like right now it's easy to look at and say, well, there really is no consequence. It's not real money. They're not actually living in the home. But we don't actually know where this all builds out 10 years down the line. Are there ways for real life property owners who, so like, I don't know if you own your building or if somebody else does, but if whoever that is, recognizes that, hey, wait a minute, this building is being sold in this virtual land and I don't want that. Are there ways to prohibit that from happening?
That really depends on the platform or on the game or whatever you want to call it. Some of them, so in Upland, you're basically out of luck at this point, and maybe it doesn't really matter. And so it's not a high stakes game in a way, and it is a game. So maybe you just like, I don't know. You should just go with it. Spotland, which is a sort of similar but not quite the same thing, based on a social AR app where you can buy little land markers or parcels of land. They told me that people can actually contact them and say, I want to opt out. I want to take my property out of this. But they also have far fewer users, and the chances are your house still doesn't belong to anybody there.
Yeah.
And then in the GeoWeb, the third sort of project I wrote about, that is one of these far more complicated things where maybe there's a higher turnover of properties, and you might be able to swoop in at some point and buy it back, or make sure that nobody else buys it. So there is no clear answer to this, but you might just want to have to check out what happens to your house right now.
Yeah, right. Check in, see what they're doing. And I'm sure these aren't the only three that exist out there and won't be. Saw an article yesterday or the day before. I wish I had it in front of me so I could quote the actual figure, but it was all about virtual real estate and just like, the billions of dollars that it's already worth, and where that's going to be 10 years down the line. And so it seems like, when we're talking about virtual lands and real estate in the virtual world, and then this, like on some degree, they're separate, but they're just going to start, converging together. And the potential of actual money being made in the virtual space on real life real estate is super high, I feel. One question that I have through all this is, in real estate, in real estate, if someone owns the land, that they've purchased, they also own air rights. Usually you own, the air that is above the land that you purchase. Therefore, you can control that, right? You can develop on the air that is above the land that you purchased. Do you think that, I realize this is, looking into a crystal ball, but it's a fun exercise anyways. Might we see a future where real estate law starts to consider the avenue of virtual real estate and the layers that are contained within, so that maybe we have air rights, maybe we also have virtual rights? What do you think?
That's certainly an option. I don't know if the law will catch up with it quickly enough.
Yeah, and that seems pretty advanced.
It's also a question, right? Should it really? Like, my story was all about my house and people owning virtual layers to my house. But you could also look at different scenarios. Like, let's say, I don't know, the burger joint down the street where you had food poisoning. Maybe it should be well within your right to leave a marker there for people to say, don't order the rare burger here. It's really bad. Like, there's a freedom of speech issue too when it comes to especially commercial venues and so forth, right? And even when I talk to lawyers about this, it turns out the property rights that we all think of as fairly absolute. I bought my house, I can do stuff with it, right? There is a lot of constraints to it, right? You bought your house, but you didn't buy the address. So Google can use the address in their maps. They can take a photo of their house. If you're on public property in the US, you can take a photo of anybody's house. A thing that you can see from the outside is fair game. So there's a lot of stuff there that isn't clearly defined, and it's only going to get more complicated in the future.
Yeah, no question. Well, I love your piece. It really got my mind going, and I appreciate you writing it. And I also appreciate you taking time to talk about it here. Janko Ruettgers, of course, writes for protocol.com. If people want to follow you online, where can they find you?
I think the easiest way is go to Protocol. We have a newsletter there too that we launched recently, entertainment newsletter. You can subscribe to that. You find my Twitter link there. Just go to Protocol and find me there.
Right on. Thank you so much, Janko. Appreciate it. We'll talk with you soon.
Anytime.